everybody. Welcome. We're joined today by Justin from MindBio Therapeutics. He came all the way out from Australia and is going to be chatting about his world's first clinical trials. Thanks for joining us, Justin.
Thanks, Patrick, and thank you, everyone. You guys are doing such a great job. To Richard, Patrick, Daniela, Christina, all of your team, it's a real credit to you, this wonderful community you've created. So well done. You should be proud of yourselves. It's for a wonderful cause, so well done. You know, before I came here, I had a whole list of statistics that I was going to reel off to you as my intro, but on the plane here, I read that 4 out of 5 young people in a poll are reporting symptoms of mental illness. And it's quite outrageous, really, in my view. And we know that the World Health Organization are estimating 20% of the world's population will experience a mental illness over the next year. And in the US alone, almost 8% of the population are expected to experience a major depressive episode. And, you know, look, we all know these numbers, right? And we all know the terrible statistic that one of the leading causes of death in our young people is death by suicide. So my proposition to you in my short time here at Plant Medicine Week, and the driving purpose of our business at MindBio Therapeutics, and the reason I founded the company, is that the state of our mental health is not good enough, and we must do better. You know, it isn't good enough that one of the leading causes of death in our young people is death by suicide. It isn't good enough that our social structures, our economic pressures, our post-COVID distress is causing the detriment and the deterioration of our children's mental and physical health. And it certainly isn't good enough that the accepted treatments for depression and anxiety and other related mental health disorders are not working in the way we'd expect them to. And I hear the gentleman and the ladies talking about Big Pharma earlier. Certainly there's billions of dollars being poured into Big Pharma, and I'm not going to beat up on Big Pharma, but we really aren't moving the dial on mental health. And even when people take these medications and the current treatment solutions on offer, they generally have debilitating side effects from what I understand. So we all know them. Let's just go through the list. So if you're taking an antidepressant, you might be experiencing gastrointestinal upsets, nausea, diarrhea, sexual side effects, insomnia, headaches, weight gain, weight loss, dry eyes, dry mouth, and dare I say it, a dry brain. It's basically true, right? So my proposition to you here at Plant Medicine Week is that we collectively in this room, we know something about these wonderful gifts of nature and their incredible potential for healing. And we've known about the healing benefits of these botanicals for centuries, but we're only just beginning to understand how they work on the body and the brain. So I'm going to share some of our experiences in our drug development program at MindBio Therapeutics. We have 5 clinical trials underway or under our belt this year, but I'm going to focus mainly on our phase 1 and our phase 2 clinical trials, Microdosing LSD. But before I do that, just a bit of background on how I came to start a psychedelics company. It's been quite a journey, as you can imagine. So I'm an investment banker by trade, and I do mergers and acquisitions, and I take companies public on stock exchanges all over the world, raise capital. And my business partner and I, we became interested in the investment thesis in psychedelics about 1.5 years ago. And the more we learned, the more we became absolutely fascinated and, to be honest with you, obsessed with the incredible potential of these drugs to change the course of mental health treatment. I mean, 25 years ago, you couldn't have walked up and down Wall Street talking about, or Bay Street or Collins Street in Melbourne, where I'm from, in Australia. You certainly couldn't have walked up and down these financial districts talking about a cannabis investment, let alone an investment in a psychedelics company. So we've come a long way. So talking about Australia, just a show of hands here, has anyone been to Australia? Yes, good. There's a few there. Has anyone been to Melbourne? Wonderful. It's a terrific place, but you know, like most countries, we struggled during COVID with almost 300 days of lockdown, and it certainly led to the deterioration in the mental health of our local communities. So we could barely leave our homes for about 300 days in a row, And this is the first time my lovely wife, Lana, here, hand up Lana, say hello. It's the first time we've travelled in over 3 years, and we've left 4 teenagers at home who are very pleased to have us out of their way. But very suspiciously, they're not taking any of our video calls. I wonder why. And perhaps they're attending to their own mental health, and so they should. So I feel blessed to come from that part of the world, and if you ever come to Australia or Melbourne, please look me up, and I'd love to host you. You know, it's the science behind psychedelics that really got to me and excited me most, and the way it was explained to me when I first discovered this industry is this. It's potentially as close to a cure as you can come for mental health disorders. That's what I was told. That's a big claim, right? So as you expect from an investment banker, and I'm into figures and facts and numbers, we created our investment thesis around doing the most robust clinical trials that being done anywhere in the world, to get the scientific we need that these drugs work and that they're safe. So our business model is created in such a way that, the clinical trials underpin our investment in the sector, and it's our firm belief that the data and the investment in high quality clinical trials is what's going to get us there. So I'm talking today about our microdosing trials. So I hear many of you saying, but LSD is not a plant medicine, and what are you doing at Plant Medicine Week? You're an imposter. Does anyone know that LSD is derived from a plant source? Some smart people. Well, you're all smart people. The smart people are down the back there. I was really surprised to hear that. I prepared a small video. It's a light-hearted look at LSD, and I could get the gentleman over at the audiovisual area to play the video. This video won an award recently. It wasn't intentional. It's a light-hearted look at LSD. It won an award next to the Porsche Taycan for Best Explainer video. And it's a video about LSD and a very light-hearted look at it. So I hope you enjoy.
LSD was first synthesized in 1938 by Albert Hofmann. He was working with the chemical found in ergot, a fungus that grows naturally on rye and other grains. 5 years later, the Swiss chemist accidentally discovered the psychedelic effects of LSD. Realizing the profound effects of LSD on consciousness and perception, he intentionally ingested a large dose and experienced the world's first acid trip on his bike ride home. In the 40s and 50s, scientists began research into the potential therapeutic effects of LSD. The drug was widely used in psychiatry to treat a range of conditions, but it began to be used recreationally, which culminated in the 1960s psychedelic counterculture. We were only just beginning to understand the power of psychedelic drugs to change the way the brain works. When U.S. President Nixon announced the war on drugs, and LSD research came to a grinding halt. Today, with the long-awaited lifting of taboos around psychedelic research, investigations are underway into LSD as a potential game changer for treatments in such conditions as depression, cognitive impairment, chronic pain, and anxiety. LSD is a psychoplastogen. This means it has an unusual ability to foster new connections in the brain. When ingested, dendrites in the brain, in a sense, grow, affecting mood and behavior. MindBio Therapeutics is undertaking a world-first clinical trial of LSD. Patients will administer microdoses at home. While not inducing psychedelic effects or trips, microdoses may facilitate a range of improved mental health outcomes.
Thank you. Won an award next to the Porsche Taycan. So anyway, that was rather unexpected. But it's a light-hearted look at this wonderful story and this wonderful chemical. And so what about our phase 1 clinical trials microdosing LSD in 80 participants? So in our clinical trials, we are creating a microdosing regimen using LSD. It's our first candidate drug. And we're creating a microdose in a form that can be effectively prescribed and consistently stored with long shelf life like any other drug, and then taken safely in microdoses by patients. So that in itself is not a simple task if anyone has ever dealt with LSD, because you need to be able to titrate up or down depending on the patient to achieve a sub-perceptual dose, and it's different for each individual. and that is part of our important intellectual property development. So we're running a unique clinical trial. In fact, as the video explained, it's a world first, but it's not really hard, I guess, in the psychedelics business to do a world first. It's so new. But it's in 80 healthy participants who will prescribe the drug by a doctor and take it at home as they would any other medication. So we have the government approvals and we have the government funding to import LSD and manipulate it in the lab and administer it to patients, firstly in the lab, and then we have approvals for the doctor to prescribe it to patients in 2-week courses as part of a 6-week treatment protocol. So this is a very large, safe phase 1 safety study. It's unusual to go out to 80 participants like this, but we wanted to collect a large amount of data in this safety trial for a number of reasons. We have about 20 scientists and doctors, chemists and engineers working on the program on a joint venture with a leading university in Australasia. Now, phase 1 trial, microdosing LSD in 80 healthies, has already been running for just on 12 months, and we've just about to complete. So, you know, if we were 3 months more advanced, I'd be able to tell you more about what we've learnt. But we're very excited about the data that's coming out of the trials in a clinical trial environment. So we're talking about a randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial subject to the scrutiny of our local authorities. So to date, we haven't been able to unblind the data that we're collecting, but we're certainly seeing some trends, and we know a lot about administering this drug in microdoses. And so how do the clinical trials work? So in the first instance, patients will come into the lab for a day, and we take a full set of bloods and the brain scans, and a real battery of biometric data is collected. And then participants are given their first dose in the lab, and the tests are repeated with bloods and scans taken every 30 minutes after the administration of the first microdose. So we're getting a real good battery of data, before and after data in the lab, whilst we assess a patient's tolerance to the drug. The patient's then sent home with a microdosing regimen, and they report back daily using some microdosing tech we've built, and both biological and psychometric data is reported back to clinicians daily, whilst patients are out in the real world. So, you know, patients are taking out LSD and microdoses in the community, and some of the data we're seeing already is fascinating and unexpected. So the first good news I have to report about microdosing LSD, it's officially safe. So our government's Clinical Trials Safety Review and Audit Committee recently cleared our studies for continuation, and that was halfway through with 40 participants, with no adverse events. So that's really, really good news for our continuation trials and our phase 2 work, and we're just about to start those. But before I talk about our phase 2 clinical trials, microdosing LSD, I'd like to give you some of our perspective on microdosing. Now, having circulated around this community for the last week or so, I probably don't need to explain what microdosing is. I'm assuming you know, but just for those people who may not know, microdosing is a convenient way to administer a sub-perceptual dose of this drug. I mean, LSD, like any other psychedelic, is a hallucinogenic drug, and when it's ingested, it has a profound impact on mood and perception and thinking and cognition. So a microdose is where patients can take the drug daily, or in our trials on a semi-regular basis. We don't administer it daily for a number of reasons. And then they get on with their day like they would when they take any other medication. So we know that people are microdosing in the community. There's a big microdosing community, and the grey literature tells us that microdoses substantially feel sharper, they feel happier, they think clearly, and we're working through the clinical trial data, and our science is working hard to understand how this is working, how does it work on the brain, what's the effect, and how a microdosing treatment regimen can be optimised for patients. What we've learned in the clinical trials is that we know that a sub-perceptual dose is different for every person, and based on a whole series of biological and also, we think, psychometric factors. And from a physiological point of view, body weight and metabolism appear to be two of those fundamental features. So we're using tens of thousands of data points, and our team of engineers are working through this data. We're also aggregating data on the qualitative experiences of patients through post-administration interviews, and we're using some specialised algorithms to sort through that mass of information that's reported back to us. We're using some microdosing tech and some wearables and AI tools that we've come up with because we want to come up with a predictive treatment regimen where we can predict the ideal microdose and an expected outcome based on these unique biometric and psychometric features of patients. So the clinicians who are experts in this, they constantly refer to this as a transdiagnostic approach to mental health treatment. And I think it's really exciting for psychedelics because ideally, once we've fully developed this, it would mean that we can target patients for a microdosing regimen based on their unique medical presentations. Something that's fascinating our scientists at the moment is that we've discovered that a microdose taken in the lab is different to a microdose taken at home. So interesting, in the lab, people feel nothing or just slightly affected. But when they go home, it's when they're getting on with their day and they're mowing the lawn, they're washing the dishes, they're talking to a friend, they're actually perceiving the same dose. So that's very interesting. So there's a big question here. What is an ideal microdose and how would a doctor effectively prescribe the right dose for a patient if these drugs were to be commercialised and available in the primary healthcare system? And that's what our microdosing clinical trials are all about. And our aim is to create an ideal microdosing therapeutic experience for patients and maximise their health outcomes. So our early observations, and we can see this, even though the data's unblinded, it's just obvious from the data we're collecting that there is an overwhelmingly increased social connectedness being reported in the psychometric data. And that's quite fascinating. It's very exciting for the future of these clinical trials and this work. And so given that many of the mental health struggles that people face and experience are often found in the complexity of their social interactions and their social experience and communications, we're very encouraged by this positive data. Social connectedness and a heightened sense of well-being is what we see over and over again from the grey literature and certainly from our experience with this clinical work. And there's some very good reasons why microdosing, we think, and certainly there's a diversity of opinions on this, but there's a very good reason why it's a good therapeutic model. The first reason is simple. It's convenient. So you can take the drug and you can get on with your day like you would be taking any other medication rather than taking a full hallucinogenic dose. And the good news is that the research has shown neuroplasticity effects in microdosing treatment models in psilocybin and LSD. And we can thank the Beckley Foundation and many other good scientific organisations for doing that important original work. So our clinical trials will collect a large amount of data, DNA and bloods and samples and so forth, and we want to understand the changes to plasticity and so forth in the brain from this microdosing treatment. We're talking about a microdose being about 10 micrograms, or a bit less or a bit more, depending on the patient. And so it very much presents as a traditional bell curve. It's evenly distributed, so about 4 micrograms either side of 10 milligrams. But that's quite a big sort of variation between 6 and 14 micrograms. LSD is believed to be a good candidate for microdosing as well because of its long-acting nature. But saying that, it sort of poses some challenges for formulation scientists as it's unstable at room temperature and in water. But how do you titrate a pill, right? So there's a whole formulation piece going on here with this microdosing work that's quite interesting and challenging. And another reason we like microdosing as a treatment model is microdoses are less disruptive to lifestyle than large one-off doses of these types of hallucinogenic drugs, simply because of the time and the recovery period required. The small doses, they're not just convenient. We believe that they're also very useful in vulnerable patient groups, such as in late-stage cancer patients, where depression and anxiety, existential distress, it presents as a comorbidity. It's regularly seen, and these patients take antidepressant drugs, and it's a huge cost on the healthcare system to have these comorbid mental health problems affecting cancer patients. So they're already experiencing pain and distress, and large doses of psychedelics we think may be too much to cope with given those circumstances. So we are just about to test that thesis in a phase 2 clinical trial microdosing LSD in late-stage cancer patients using our treatment protocols. Microdosing is also scalable, so we can get the treatments out to patients en masse. And look, I'm a supporter of the assisted psychedelic psychotherapies in a clinic setting, and there's some wonderful work being done around the world. And I've just went out and saw the Hive clinics It's great work that the team at Hive that they're doing. So we're supporters of that, but there are some real benefits to the microdosing treatment protocols. In our microdosing protocol, we will absolutely, in our phase 2 clinical trials, test adjacent psychotherapies. We think it's essential. We don't believe a pill on its own is going to solve all the trauma and stresses and the pain of people that are suffering from these mental health conditions. I mean, there's some really interesting dynamics here, though, in the treatment using microdoses. And so, for instance, if a person comes into a clinic, when do they take their microdose? Do they take it just before? Do they take it during? Or does it not matter? So we're going to try and figure that out. And that's quite interesting work that we're doing also, because the formulation of, if you say that a patient should take a microdose just before an assisted therapy session, you would want that dose of the drug to be bioavailable and to be having an effect on that person at the time. So this is another challenge and another interesting piece of work that we're doing with our drug formulation work with LSD, looking at the time release and the time of the administration. So we like the investment thesis and the scientific thesis of microdosing. We're one of the only public companies doing microdosing clinical trials, particularly at this scale with LSD. And our aim is to have these treatments that we're developing available from a doctor's script pad. So just to reverse a little bit and talk about our company status and who we are. And so I founded the company in Melbourne, Australia with my business partner. We raised capital locally, and then we vended MindBio Therapeutics into a listed investment issuer in Canada, which has this very special status of being able to incubate these kinds of assets and then spin them out in their own right. So we're just about to, we've been incubating in the company called Black Hawk Growth Corp on the CSC for the last 8 or 9 months, and we're just about to spin out probably in July, we think. And we will list on the Canadian Securities Exchange with about 2,500 very highly supportive investors of these clinical trials. So we're just completing our phase 1 LSD microdosing trials. I wish this conference was 3 months more advanced, because I'd be able to tell you more about this important work. But we're about to start 2 phase 2 clinical trials. One's in late-stage cancer patients and the other's in patients with major depressive disorder. And as I've just mentioned, that I think assisted psychotherapy is just important in microdosing as it is in a macrodosing treatment model. So in our phase 2 trial with patients with major depressive disorder, this is going to be a substantial clinical trial in the field, and we're fully funded to complete these trials. Initially, we'll be doing a small open-label pilot to understand the nuances of this patient cohort. We think it's important. We want to make sure that we get it right. When and how do you wean them off their current antidepressants? We've seen some issues with some clinical trials that have been completed and some problems with suicidality. So we're going to do a small open-label pilot, and then we'll go to a fully randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in 90 participants. This is a long time to talk. Just excuse me for a minute. Thanks. And this one, and I love this trial, this important work in cancer patients, microdosing LSD in late-stage cancer patients. And these people are in terrible distress. They've got anxiety, they've got depression, and it's a tremendous stress on the patients and the families. So we're going to administer LSD in microdoses as an adjunct to meaning-centered psychotherapy. So the meaning-centered psychotherapy is a type of psychotherapy that's designed and clinically proven for cancer patients, and it's quite effective apparently. It's commonly used, and we hope to get some insightful data on how adding LSD in microdoses, how that works for patients who are undergoing this specialised psychotherapy. I'm very excited about that work. I think it's a worthwhile cause, and if you have ever walked into an oncology ward or been affected by cancer, you know what I mean. And so since this is Plant Medicine Week, it would be amiss of me not to take some time to reflect and honour some of the sacred aspects and the traditional cultural uses of botanicals in healing and this wonderful gift from nature that we have. It's often said that as humans, we've been provided with everything we need to flourish and to enjoy and survive, and it seems we may have in our fingertips the natural recipes to cure some of these mental illnesses and the sicknesses that have seemed to be overcoming us. And as we progress our drug and formulation work in our business, and we're certainly committed to honouring these cultural and traditional aspects of the use of these drugs, we think it's important because they've informed our pathway here. And thanks to Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist who discovered LSD in the lab, we're now advancing some of the most important clinical work with this important chemical and its potential game changer for mental health treatment. So I'm open to questions. I'm very grateful that you've spent some time to listen to me. I hope you've gleaned something of interest and learned something from this. We're excited about this important clinical work. It's a great cause and we want to change the course of mental health treatment. So thanks for your attention. Patrick, did you want to take some questions? Does anyone have any questions about these clinical trials? Yes.
We can sit down if you want.
Okay, great.
I would like to ask, what is the side effects after this kind of therapy? And during the therapy, do you need to increase dose? And what's going to be with patient when he's finished the therapy? It's going to be ups and downs, or how it should be?
Hello. Yes, that's good. It works. Look, they're very good questions. So firstly, what are the side effects? Look, and that's what the clinical trial work's about, right? We've got a fair thesis. We understand the reason why we're doing these trials is because microdosing appears to be very beneficial to people's mental health. There's substantial data to that effect, but we've got to do these rigorous clinical trials to figure it out. So to your question on what are the side effects, we have seen some interesting effects of LSD in microdoses, and the need to titrate down in some patients who experience agitation. So the way it's described to me is that sometimes it's too much and they feel like they've had too many coffees, and so we have to bring the dosage down. This is important for our formulation work because, as I said, you just can't give the same pill to each person in this treatment model. And the second part of your question is, what about the psychotherapy sessions and how does that work, and then what's the ongoing treatment? So that's another aspect of our clinical trials. We're going to try and figure that out. When we set out to do these trials, we had a plan to do a phase 2 in a particular way, but given our experience in the very long, we've been doing this for 12 months in 80 patients, so we've learned a lot. We're changing our model and our thinking based on the experience. So I think it's important to look at the data and to adapt, and that's certainly what we're going to do. We're not in a rush. This is a marathon, with the drug development work. So the way I would see this working is that perhaps there is an ongoing psychotherapy treatment and an assessment at various points. But we're going to figure out the answer to that question. I can't remember the third aspect of your question, but if you remind me,
what's going to be with patient after he's finished therapy?
Oh, right. So that's part of the same answer, yeah, I guess. And so the simple answer to that is we don't know. We're going to figure that out in our trials. As I said, the first part of our phase 2, we weren't going to do an open label, but we're going to because we want to understand the patient group and the particular issues they're going to go through with this, because this is in 80 healthies, and they appear to tolerate it well. It's safe. We've had one person drop out of the trials. I think they had COVID or something. So we're going to figure that out. But I'm seeing with many of the companies around here that they've got some great models, and we're open to things like an assisted session in a macrodose, having the proper integration and all those treatments, and then perhaps progressing onto a microdosing regimen. That seems to make sense to me, to kind of really get that dramatic change. Certainly in patients who are suicidal or in tremendous trauma, it would make sense to perhaps do that chronic, major intervention first, and then wean them into a microdosing program. But we're just focusing at the moment on the microdosing.
And last questions. During the last few years, there is a lot of people who suffer from anxiety and panic attacks. Do you use LSD in this case?
Look, I've seen, and I'm not sure of the company that's doing it, but one of the larger companies, I think, is doing an LSD study on anxiety. It may be Compass or someone might be able to answer that question for us. But yeah, they're certainly indicated for in anxiety. It's also indicated in other conditions. We're interested in chronic pain. I mean, from an investment thesis perspective, I mean, if for instance taking LSD reduces pain, and we can prove that. So one of the reasons why we've done such a large phase 1 trial is that we want to understand how it affects inflammation and pain and so forth. So we're collecting all that data, and our team of engineers are going to use algorithms and artificial intelligence to kind of figure that out. And what we hope to see, we may very well see that LSD is effective in people that are plus 70 kilos. They're 5'10". And their personality scales they're lower on high on disagreeableness in their personality scales. So we don't know, but I'm guessing that, and what I'd like to get to is that maybe one day we could get to a point where we could prescribe this drug very specifically to patients and know and be able to predict the outcomes. Because I think it's kind of unacceptable that you would have a patient walk into a doctor and that says I'm stressed, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, and they just get given a drug that really has no meaning. It's a dose that's kind of arbitrarily decided from some clinical trial 30, 40 years ago. And it seems to me that those treatments are not working. Certainly when the government, our local government, approved our trials and they've given us $1 million to progress our phase 2 trials. The opening remark that they made in approving the trial work and particularly improving our microdosing at home, so people are taking LSD in the community and it's legal in our trials. The first line said this: they said the current treatments don't work, so we want to fund this research, this good research, to see if we can find better options.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good questions.
If anybody else from the audience has a question, feel free to raise your hand. Go for it.
Hello. Yes. Have you considered doing trials with psilocybin? And if so, why did you choose for LSD?
Yeah, well, I think I guess it's a choice of the scientists that we have in our team, and our leading scientist, Dr. Suresh Muthukumaraswamy. He's probably one of the leading LSD chemists in the world. Has worked with Dr. David Nutt and worked at the Imperial School in London. And he's also an expert in brain imaging and brain technology. So I think the general interest of the scientists and the expertise, but now that we have the microdosing, the treatment protocol and the clinical trial protocol approved and set, we've got the facilities to be able to put any drug into a microdosing program. And so we would love to talk to scientists that have got, perhaps an analogue or a novel drug, and we can trial it. If you think it's going to work, I mean, we would love to talk to people. But we're certainly interested in psilocybin and other drugs. Personally, I'd like to trial a novel drug, and we're talking to a number of companies that have developed something, but it's very difficult. It's very expensive to set up a laboratory to do this clinical trial work. It's millions of dollars that we've had to raise. So that's my job, is to raise money, and I've not been able to do that. But there's only, what we can see of the public companies doing this rigorous clinical trials, only about 12 public companies that are doing it, and probably only 5 doing it at a standard that you'd expect to get through the FDA. So yes, the answer is yes. We're very interested in psilocybin or any other drug.
Okay, and second question, do you think whatever you learn from the LSD trials could be applicable to psilocybin, or do you see any similarities, or you think this is a completely different study?
It's a very good question. So the way that we are conducting the data analysis and the algorithms and the wearables and the technology we're building, our engineering team are building a microdosing feedback system, so that patients can wear their Fitbit or whatever it is, and data can be fed back to clinicians. So we're going to understand firstly what microdosing is all about, and we'll have a model for understanding the data that's fed back. So we're really interested in doing that. If anyone's got a drug that you want to trial, we could get it set up within 6 weeks in our laboratory, and we've got 20 people that can work on it immediately. So yeah, that question is a good one, and yeah, we'd love to do more, but it's a shame, that it's a small industry, and we're doing there's 5 clinical trials. We've got other areas of our business. We've got digital therapeutics, and we're interested in clinics and this drug work. But for me personally, what I want to do is I want to get to the treatments. It's a long road to getting these drugs approved, and we did it with COVID, right? The vaccines, we got them fast-tracked, and I think we should get them fast-tracked. So I don't care whether it's LSD or psilocybin or some novel drug that we can trial. I want to get treatments to patients sooner rather than later.
Okay, if I may, a third question. Do you think you might be interested in trials on people who have not severe mental health issues, thinking that probably everybody could benefit from microdosing? Is that something you're looking at, or is it just the bigger mental problems?
It's another very good question, and I must say I knew nothing about psychedelics or microdosing before I started all this, but I have learnt that obviously there's reported benefits of microdosing. It's quite fascinating, really, and it's probably no surprise given the scientific thesis behind it and what it's doing to the brain. So I don't really know. We've got 4 kids, 4 teenagers. I'm not really sure, about the legalisation of these drugs. I'm not sure I want my children having increased access to them, but certainly they are very interested in talking about magic mushrooms and so forth around the dinner table. So I'm not sold on it yet, but I know half the room here have got experience with this, and I find it very interesting. I need to learn more before I can find my position on that one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to raise your hand anytime throughout the event.
Hi, Justin. Thank you. I'm wondering, when it comes to data collection, the measurement instruments that you use, so you mentioned that you work with wearables, so which biomarkers you'd be measuring, and do you work with survey data as well?
And this is where I wish I had our scientists with us, because I'd love to answer that question a lot better than I'm going to, but let me give it a go. So we're doing our clinical trials out of the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and it's a world-class university, and they're fitted out with, so it's a joint venture between the School of Pharmacy, the School of Medicine, and the School of Engineering, and they have some of the best equipment in the world, MRIs and scanning equipment, and so we're able to conduct a whole battery of scans, and they're going overboard with everything. I think they were saying they've got 12 fridges full of blood and samples that they're collecting, but it's some great work. I wish I could answer that question in more scientific detail. I can't, but if you want to connect, I can provide some of the papers. There's certainly links to the clinical trial protocols, they're public, and so you could benefit perhaps from looking at those protocols.
Thanks.
Good question.
It actually brings up a question I was going to ask. When you talk about microdosing, generally it's sub-perceptual dosing. You're not supposed to necessarily perceive the difference between one or the other. So when you're measuring the result of a microdosing regimen, what kind of indicators are you looking at? Is it more physical biomarkers, or is it more mental, or is it kind of an aggregate of them all?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So it's an exploratory process, really, because you've got to it's got to be via sort of self-report. But the EEGs and the brain scans can sort of determine what's going on in the brain. So we can figure that out pretty well in the laboratory. We're taking bloods after the first administration. We take bloods every sort of 30 minutes for about 4 hours, and they continue the brain scannings, EEG, and they take all sorts of other samples. So I think the whole idea here is to understand what effect is this having on the brain, how long does it last, and how does it relate to self-report on being sub-perceptual. Because it's not easy to get that kind of sub-perceptual dose. And then there's also it's a blinded study, right? But when people feel the effects of a microdose, there's kind of an expectancy that's you get the expectancy effect, and there's a whole controversy around the expectancy effects of microdosing. And I can send you an epic paper from our lead scientist on this, who has done all the arithmetic around expectancy effects and is trying to counter that in these studies. If you're interested, let me know. I can't talk you through it. I'm not, I'm not the person to talk to about that. But that's a good question.
Leave it to the scientists.
To the scientists.
Makes a lot of sense. In terms of on the regulation side, New Zealand, they approved for you the first take-home clinical trial of LSD in the world. Do you know why they were so friendly to that without maybe major legislation in place so far?
Yeah, and look, the real credit to the New Zealand government. I mean, mental health, as it is all over the world, is tremendously bad in New Zealand. Children and young people, and the rate of suicides in some of the Indigenous communities is very high. So the current treatments don't work. That's what the government has said, I guess we were lucky in some level, and I think it's really encouraging that the trials have proven safe. We haven't had any adverse events, and we look like we're going to get continued support from the government to do these trials, and also continued funding, which is very important.
Yeah, and so what kind of parameters are there to accessing that funding from the government?
Yeah, well, I guess obviously having a robust clinical trial model and protocols. I mean, we're just about to complete a 12-month study, phase 1 in 80 healthies, but that study took 18 months of preparation to even begin. So it's years of development and work with the governments, authorities, and so forth. So we've been just fortunate to be in the game for that long and to get here. As I said, I wish I'd had more data. If it was July, I'd better tell you a lot more about what we learned.
Wonderland will come soon enough. Back over to the audience. If there's any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. I don't want to steal the mic the whole time. But in the meantime, I know you talked about the clinical trials and getting access to generation 2 psychedelics, putting them into the study mechanism, but you've also sort of indicated interest in working maybe with more technology or companies that are doing innovative things maybe outside of the drug development space.
Yeah,
want to talk about that?
Yeah, we have a digital therapeutics business, and there's a bit of a cancer theme going on in our business. We're doing a microdosing LSD study in cancer patients, but we're also our leading science in our cancer division, Dr. Russell. She is working on a digital intervention, a therapeutic to intervene in cancer patients who experience pain. So pain is a common experience in people with cancer, and pain leads to low mood, which leads to a high risk of some of these mental health disorders, and then the comorbidity of depression and anxiety and having to take antidepressants. But also pain, people are also taking opioids, which if you've got bowel cancer or it's kind of makes the condition worse. So we're really excited about using digital therapeutics to and mindfulness practices to help patients manage their pain better.
Interesting. And in terms of the digital therapeutics, the mental aspect, that side of the equation, based on the data you're receiving so far, what percentage, even if it's just a rough estimate, do you think is due to the medicine, having physical effects in the body, and what percent of it do you think is, the integration and doing that work in practice to kind of become a healthier overall person?
Are you talking about psychedelics here?
Yeah, in relation to the psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, look, this is my hunch, and I think it's because we don't really have the data yet. There are a few phase 2 clinical trials going on, but my hunch is that the traumas and the things that are just ingrained in people who experience these terrible conditions, they take a lot more unpacking than just taking a pill. But taking either a macrodose or a microdose, I think the understanding is that people are in a much better place to be able to accept these therapies. And one of the reasons why we're looking at we're combining the biometric data and the psychometric data is we want to understand some of the personality elements of this as well. So the doctors talk about personality scales of agreeableness and disagreeableness, and just imagine someone that's highly disagreeable and quite closed on their personality scales. They may benefit from these treatments because it tends to open their mind. They're in a better state, and so that's our hunch. But we've got to prove it, and that's what the trials are all about.
Yeah, and in terms of once you've proved it and you have access for medical purposes to microdosing LSD, a lot of people that I've heard talk on our platform are in the space when we're talking about recreational versus medical, and kind of the fine line of difference between what is medical if you're a relatively healthy person. Do you think that the work on the medical side with the clinical trials that you're doing might help, advance the recreational or maybe decriminalize aspect a little sooner, just based on the, the evidence that's coming out and the data suggesting low harm, high success?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't really know the answer to the question, Patrick, but I think well, just imagine, right, if LSD or psilocybin and microdoses works substantially better, safer, and it works better and it saves people's lives, I kind of imagine that that's going to create kind of a movement in the recreational space. I'm not, as I said, I don't know enough about the decriminalisation arguments. We're a medicinal purpose company, and I think that's sort of a challenging thing to sort of work through as these things happen, as we work through the data. But I imagine it's going to cause a movement, that an increased use of these drugs recreationally.
Yeah, you would hope so, at least. And in terms of the medical movement, so you're working in Australia and New Zealand right now. In terms of other places maybe around the world that you're identifying as targets for studies or doing more clinical work, where else do you have on your radar potentially?
Yeah, look, there's some impressive work being done by all these wonderful companies that are here and around the world. So we're interested in partnering and collaborating. We'll certainly, once we are spun out from Black Hawk and we're listed in our own right, we'll be trying to acquire or invest in and support other clinical trial work. That's our background. We're funders, and so that's certainly my interest to do more of it and to get more of this important work completed.
And in terms of the clash between maybe the scientific world and the funding world, or not the clash, but just the coming together of two different forces, what have you experienced so far in terms of like integrating more scientific-minded people or medical-minded people into the capital markets? Because there is a bit of a culture clash of sorts, Suits and Roots kind of coming together for the first time on this.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, so we've sort of had to learn this. I don't have a background in medicine or psychedelics, so what I have learned is that there's wonderful potential for these drugs to change the course of mental health treatment. There's a fundamental botanical, cultural, traditional use of these drugs that I believe we should honour, because that's led us here. So I'm conscious of those aspects. In our way we've created our board, one of our directors is the chief executive of the Australian Psychological Society, the member organisation with about 30,000 members in Australia. Dr. Burgess, she's been tremendously helpful for me to understand how to communicate to clinicians, and with this, it's quite a sensitive topic. But it's been very well received by the medical community in Australia, and certainly I'm quite surprised at how well this has been accepted, to be honest. I was a bit worried about talking about LSD with my pinstripe colleagues in the financial districts, but they get it. They've experienced it. Everyone's been touched by mental illness. It's important. It's important work, and we've all been touched by suicide and trauma and depression, and certainly many of us in our team have experienced that in the communities and our friends and so forth. So we're sensitive. I think we want to honour those cultural aspects, I think.
And then on the flip side, so the medical community becoming more welcoming and open-minded to the idea. What about the financial community? Because obviously, you're coming from that background. You've got a strength in capital markets. What maybe has surprised you the most based on the reception to this burgeoning industry?
I've just been surprised at how well we've been received. I was a bit nervous talking to my financial colleagues at the start about these types of drugs, because I think my mindset was more thinking about the recreational aspects, and that's challenging, right? I don't know enough about that, but certainly when I understood the medicine, the science, well, it's a no-brainer. It's like any other drug. We just do the data, we do the trials, we get the data. If it works and it's safe, it's our obligation to get these treatments out to the market. So it's been a surprise how well we've been received, and I think this COVID distress that we're experiencing, we understand that mental health needs to improve, and perhaps it could be a game-changing treatment.
Yeah, and I mean, my perspective is kind of biased on this because microdosers literally started in the peak of the first wave of COVID when the lockdowns started happening, and we brought everyone together online. But have you noticed an acceleration in the interest in the industry, funding, and that kind of thing, specifically due to COVID, or maybe due to the way the world changed around COVID?
It's a mix of things. I don't really know. I mean, I suspect that COVID distress that we've all experienced has it's brought mental health to the front of our minds, and also the understanding that the current treatments are not working. So why not invest in these? But our narrative really is around doing the trial work to get the data to see whether this stuff is safe and it works. So That's where we spend most of our narrative is in that space. And we try not to make too many claims that, beyond that.
Yeah, fair enough. On the last panel that we just heard, there was a question at the end about the pharmaceutical industry entering or getting curious about the psychedelic industry. Have you noticed any sort of perceptions on that or increased conversations with that side of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, this is a drug, right? Like any other drug, and it just happens to be LSD or psilocybin. And once they see the clinical data, they'll have to get on board, right? That's the model that the pharmaceutical companies work with. But it's not easy for executives and pinstripes and financial people to kind of talk about some of these issues. But I think these wonderful events are about education, and the more we do it, and the more there's a great diversity of people in the room. We've all got different voices and different ways of communicating, so I think that's really important. So I'm certainly going to do whatever I can with my position and my standing in our community, my community, to communicate the benefits of these drugs.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of forward-looking, you mentioned that you're going to be doing a spin-out quite soon. What are kind of next steps after that once you're really 100% in the psychedelic industry, you got more funds to deploy? What are you looking at towards next steps?
Yeah, I mean, look, at heart, we're a clinical trials, we're a research and development company, but, at heart, I think, we're very interested in getting treatments to people sooner. And, the drug development process and the approval process takes years. So I suspect we are going to look at, the clinic experience. We've already got one clinic in Alberta under the Black Hawk Group in Canada. And so I think, more drug development, more clinical trials. We'll be acquiring companies. We're already talking to a number of companies about merging and acquiring those businesses. And, as I said, my particular expertise is in being able to fund these ventures, and that's what I want to do, is to get more of this important work under our umbrella and see if we can get some treatments to market.
Makes a lot of sense. With 5 minutes left or so, I just want to call out for any more audience questions if you have any. Otherwise, I will keep talking. In terms of did we see one there? No, just saying hi. Is there a mic that we could? Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Justin. Thank you, first of all, for your time and your efforts and your incredible work. So I come from the supply chain aspect, and we already spoke, but there are wonderful technologies that are coming up to make more and more and more drugs available. And are you looking and sourcing also these technologies from suppliers?
Thank you. Appreciate your kind comments. Nice to meet you during this conference. Yeah, look, we're absolutely interested. The companies we've taken public, we've got a particular expertise in technology. So technology makes sense to us because those things we can scale easily and we can get, in the activities that we do. But certainly interested in all sorts of technologies. I think, from what I understand, you're talking about the technologies to do with the manufacturing processes, or the technologies so in the supply chain. Yeah, they're interesting. To be frank with you, I don't know much about it, but I'm sure you and others will educate me suitably over the next few days. That's a good question. We were very interested in technology.
Brings up a good question that I had in mind. Have you noticed, because you've obviously worked in many different industries before, the psychedelic space being a couple years new to you at this point, have you noticed a difference in perhaps like the people in the industry and how differently communication can happen and openness to working together versus kind of siloed?
Yeah, I mean, look, the people in this sector, it's very obvious that people want to do something good in the work that they're doing. They get up, they don't go to work, they go out and they're trying to solve the mental health crisis, or they're trying to solve some medical problem. So I've been inspired by it, and the more I do it, the more I talk about it, I feel the same way. We've got a job to do, and I think we know something about this, and it's our responsibility to communicate it in the appropriate way. It's not easy, right? But we've got a lot of voices in the room.
Yep, absolutely. Any final questions from the audience here? One over here. We'll get you the mic.
What's your opinion on the potential cardiovascular risks from microdosing?
Now, firstly, I'm not a scientist, but would certainly, so forgive the answer. And I promise at the next conference I'll bring a couple of our leading scientists with me. But we have, it's something we're aware of. It's a common question, and basically the data is going to tell us. That's what this trial will do. We will have settled all of these questions in microdosing, particularly with LSD, by the end of the trial. So, hopefully we can answer that question in Miami.
Excellent. And will the results be public, or how are we going to...
Well, the great process of academic institutions that all the scientists want to publish, right? So we've got work with in-house scientists and also joint ventures with universities. And our approach to this work is that we are very supportive of the publishing of the work, but the first thing we get to do with our agreements is we get to protect the intellectual property before it's published. But we understand that important academic process, and we're supporting that.
Thank you.
Good question.
Once the intellectual property that you've done the work for is secured, is this something that you would maybe look to share with other people to help advance their research quicker than otherwise?
Yeah, look, that's my my choice will be to say yes to that, to advance this important work. So we learned something that obviously our intellectual property is going to be very nuanced towards microdosing and dosage and and how to prescribe the ultimate dose of LSD, this drug. But certainly many of the aspects I'm willing to share those, because I think for the betterment of the industry, and the betterment of these treatments.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a collaborative, context in that case to be able to share with others.
Yeah, I mean, and there's processes with patent applications and so forth to bring protection mechanisms. Once you've published, once you have your patent submitted and so forth, you've got some protection around that. But I'm certainly willing to share any of much of our, because it's through a major university. The clinical trials have been published. The protocols have been published in advance, which is a very important aspect of these trials. And much of the data will be publicly available.
So for anybody in the audience that has, maybe further questions or wants to get in touch with you to, bring forward some second generation psychedelics or do some clinical trials, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, we're definitely interested in talking to amazing scientists. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to do that. MindBio Therapeutics, and look me up and send me and DM me.
Cool. Well, with that, I want to thank you. The work that we do at these conferences isn't possible without our supporters and partners and speakers, so we really appreciate you coming out and looking forward to Wonderland with more data and more scientists.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks to Justin.